Even though time is an illusion, we will participate in this illusion together. And I think it's 2:30. So, let's take a look. I'm sorry. Did someone hear a bodhisattva? Okay, is everyone in a nirvanic state now? That was my intention, to remove you of your perceptions. I'm trying to get podcasts going, so that's why, so that you'll never have to attend again. Just kidding. So you should expect podcasting. I know in a couple of cases people can't make one or the other days, and I shouldn't just say this, but I will. I think all these lectures should be online for you at some point after I overcome my own technological hurdles. Now, we talked last time about how Buddhism isn't really Buddhism. He didn't call it Buddhism, that's a Western name, and he's not the enlightened one. He is awake. So light has to do with another tradition. It's a Western label. And Westerners encountered Buddhism in the modern period through colonialism and saw somehow the Enlightenment in Buddhism and Confucianism as well. They discovered Buddhism during the Enlightenment. Confucius and the Buddha were thought to be enlightened rulers because they were free then of, well, dogmatic, or so it was thought, dogmatic kind of control issues in their philosophies. And that's more or less true. The Buddha defined ultimate reality right here, right? We talked about this term dharma that you need to know because you can't translate that term. Pratiksha samutpada is another mouthful. We learn another culture, we just have to pick up some vocabulary. So those are two you kind of should know. Praticca samutpada, of course, everything is interrelated. Because everything is interrelated, there is no self. That's what the Buddha thought. Let's take a look then. We talked about this. I prefer this term, thought tradition. Religion, philosophy, too confusing. Everything humans do, from animism to Marxism, is a thought tradition. So I will appreciate it if you use that terminology when talking about Buddhism. I mentioned the Aryans. This is part of the backdrop of Indian civilization. The Aryans, there you go, they conquered all over, establishing themselves as the Hittites first. They smelted iron and invented the chariot, the nuclear weapon of the second millennium BCE. So, spreading their language far and wide, they went as far as northwest India and infiltrated further to permeate the whole subcontinent. Then, as well, they went west to Europe. I think I mentioned the two countries, did I not? Named after them, Ireland and Iran. So, part of the backdrop, as I mentioned last time, Greek, Latin, Sanskrit are closely related. These Aryans from the Black and Caspian Sea were not blonde-haired, blue-eyed Germans. Hitler was quite wrong about who they were. That they existed is a fact. They called themselves the nobles, the noble ones. That's what Aryan actually means. And what we see even in the Hittites, 1800 BCE, is an inclusive pantheon. What does that mean? That means when the Hittites encountered Babylonians or Egyptians, they inclusively incorporated the local deities into their own pantheon, their own assembly of gods and goddesses. Now, as they enter India, and along with that, we see here the cognate deity of three languages. Deus Pitar, the sky or light father, we know as Zeus Pater, and Romans knew as Jupiter. So, Already, much in Buddhism, even the name Buddha has a cognate in Greek, puto, which means a wise or learned person. It's not as alien as you may think. And when we talk about East-West, well, it's an artificial distinction. We see Christianity, Judaism, and Islam in the so-called East, and Buddhism and Hinduism permeated to varying degrees even in the West, a la the Gypsies, for one notable example. So focus on sun and light worship. The sun was deemed a doorway or portal from this world to the next. Certain creatures like dwarves and deer were thought to have come from this sun portal. As they invaded different countries, though, well, different things happened. And in India, the Aryans met with a native tradition, pre-Aryan yogic traditions associated with so-called Dravidian people. In fact, well, the Aryans were not civilizers. Like the Mongols, like the English, didn't have much civilization until they encountered other more advanced civilizations. And this is what happened in India. At Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, we see ruins of the pre-Aryan Indian societies, and we see figures in yogic postures on clay tablets. That's the evidence we have that yoga predates the Aryans. And I'm sure none of us have ever heard of Irish yoga, right? Italian yoga? No. The Aryan language spread everywhere as barbarian conquerors spread English and so forth to different parts of the world through conquest. Encountering yogic traditions, they are absorbed and amalgamated into a giant Indian stew, along with this third notable one, no self and emptiness. We don't find anything like that in the Aryan traditions. We don't find it in the native yogic traditions, as emphatic as they are about consciousness and meditation. Where does it come from? Ishii Yamada of Tokyo University suggested it was a Himalayan view. The Buddha was born in the foothills of the Himalayas and represents something unique in the Indian mixture, a late mixture. And he's part of a general rebellion, in fact, against Aryan culture. I mentioned the Vedas, which contain stories of these gods and goddesses who all have their Hittite, Greek, and Roman cousins, even they're the same god, different pronunciations. The Aryans then imposed a rather infamous social structure. We know it as the caste system. Caste is Portuguese from casta, which means rank or position, hierarchy, but it's not the Sanskrit term. Varna ashrama is. Varna meaning color, and related, I understand, to the term varnish in English. So, when the lighter-skinned but not blonde-haired, blue-eyed, black Caspian Sea Aryans invaded, they did find darker-skinned people. And the Vedas even mentioned the dasas or dakshas. Dasa means slave or servant. Daksha means southerner. And their dark complexion. In the Vedas, we see a creation myth that explains where these castes come from. We're told Prajapati, or the lord of progeny, of beasts or creation, created the Brahmins out of his mouth, the Kshatriyas out of his arms, Vaishyas or merchants out of his stomach, and Shudras out of his feet. So, explaining why these swarthier black Caspian Sea Aryans should dominate those they conquered. Makes sense to me. There's an alternative Indian theory that claims the language similarities between Sanskrit, etc., and these other languages is due to trade. Take your choice. Not important particularly for this class. However, from my reading of history, looks like conquest is the way languages are spread, sadly. Then we have the question of outcasts, people who are not even part of the system.